He thought he'd seen it all. Decades in the spotlight, decisions that shaped millions of lives, and questions that could topple reputations had toughened him, or so he believed. But when the soft voice of X, Elon Musk's son, cut through the din of a White House dinner, it wasn't just a question, it was a revelation. What happened next will take your breath away, make you rethink your fears, and maybe even change how you see life. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a child's words. It's about how one question can turn a world upside down. That evening, in April 2025, the East Room of the White House glowed with grandeur. A long table draped in crisp white linen sparkled with crystal goblets and silver cutlery, catching the light of chandeliers. Golden reflections danced on marble walls, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut roses and expensive cologne. Titans filled the room, world leaders, generals, tech moguls, their names blazing in headlines. They debated quantum computing, space missions, and global economics, their voices blending into a symphony of power and ambition. But amid this sea of suits and ties was one guest, nearly invisible, a 5-year-old boy, A-12, Elon Musk's son, whose unusual name was already legendary. X sat at the far end of the table, his small hands fidgeting with a linen napkin, twisting it into a clumsy knot. He wasn't supposed to be there. A fluke, the result of a sick nanny and Elon's refusal to miss the dinner. But fate loves such flukes. President Donald Trump, a man with a reputation as an unyielding leader, sat at the head of the table. His golden hair and piercing gaze radiated confidence, but that night he was pensive. He watched the guests, tossing in witty remarks that sparked laughter, but his mind wandered. Something about the atmosphere felt too staged, too rehearsed, like a scene from a carefully directed show. He felt a weariness, not physical, but the kind that builds from years in the spotlight, where every word is weighed and every misstep becomes a headline. And then, in the midst of a heated debate about cybersecurity, X's voice, clear and bell-like, sliced through the noise. "Excuse me, I have a question." The room froze. Glasses paused mid-air. Eyes turned to the boy, whose gaze burned with curiosity. Elon Musk, seated beside him, gave a faint smile, used to his son's unpredictable outbursts. Trump leaned forward, intrigued. "What happens when people die?" The question hung in the air, fragile as a glass orb, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. The silence was deafening. A prime minister coughed, a general stared into his glass, a tech mogul fidgeted with his tie. Even Elon Musk, known for his lightning-fast responses, froze, his eyes distant, as if looking beyond the room. No one answered. The adults, accustomed to shaping the world's fate, were helpless before a child's sincerity. Someone tried to change the subject, and the conversation lurched forward, louder, as if to erase the moment. But Trump couldn't let it go. He saw X's shoulders slump, his gaze dim as he realized no answer was coming. In that moment, something inside Trump cracked. Why did this question hit him so hard? And what lies behind the silence adults guard so fiercely? Keep listening, because the answers will lead to astonishing discoveries. As the guests dispersed, their laughter echoing through marble corridors, Trump stayed behind in the East Room. The chandelier still blazed, but the light felt cold, the air heavy with the scent of cooled coffee and melting dessert. He walked to the window, gazing at the south lawn, where tree shadows danced under the moon like ghosts of the past. X's question played in his mind, a stuck record. What happens when people die? It wasn't just about death. It was about memory, love, what we leave behind. Trump knew loss. His older brother Fred had died years ago, his life cut short by a battle with alcoholism. But his death left a wound in Trump's heart, one he'd never healed. He remembered, as a kid, asking his parents where Fred had gone, but their answers were vague, wrapped in religious phrases that offered no comfort. "He's in a better place," his mother said, her eyes brimming with pain, but young Donald sensed it wasn't the whole truth. Over the years, he'd learned to dodge such questions, deeming them impractical, unnecessary. But Elon Musk's son, with his innocent gaze and courage, brought him back to that boy who stared at the stars, searching for answers. Trump stood by the window, his fingers brushing the cold glass, his thoughts swirling like leaves in the wind. He recalled a night as a teenager, sitting on the porch of their Queens home, staring at the stars. Fred had just given him a new baseball, and they laughed, tossing it back and forth until dark. "Donald," Fred said then, "always keep your head high, but don't forget what matters." Trump hadn't understood at the time, but now, decades later, those words echoed like a call. What mattered? Fame, power, or something simpler, more human? X's question had stirred memories he'd buried deep, and now they demanded attention. He knew he had to find X. He couldn't let that question go unanswered. But what would he say? And why did it feel so vital? You'll find out soon, because Trump's next step will change everything. Driven by impulse, Trump threw on a coat and stepped into the garden. The night was crisp, the air scented with fallen leaves and damp earth. His footsteps crunched on the gravel path, the sound carrying in the stillness broken only by distant crickets. Moonlight bathed the south lawn, turning it into a silvery sea where each leaf seemed alive. Under an old oak, its branches spread like arms embracing the sky, he spotted a small figure. It was X, sitting on a stone bench, his blazer crumpled, the napkin from dinner now a wadded ball in his fist. The boy's eyes glistened with tears, fixed on the ground as if it held answers. Trump stopped. His heart tightened. He could walk away, leave this to someone else, an aide, security, even Elon. But something instinctive, memory, conscience, pulled him forward. He sat on the bench, leaving space between them, and said softly, "X, you asked a big question tonight." The boy didn't look up. His fingers nervously twisted the napkin, turning it into a shapeless lump. "My grandma left last year," he whispered. "Dad said she died, but I don't know where she went." "Nobody explains." X's voice trembled, and Trump felt his heart clench. He knew that pain, the emptiness left when someone vanishes and no one says why. He thought of Fred, his laugh, his habit of teasing his younger brother, his kindness that Trump hadn't appreciated until it was too late. After Fred's death, Trump didn't cry. He couldn't afford to. He threw himself into business, politics, building an empire to drown out the pain. But now, looking at X, Elon Musk's son, he realized he'd never truly processed that loss. "I don't think your grandma's gone for good," Trump said carefully, his voice softer than usual. "I think the people we love leave traces, like stars leave light, even when they're gone." X looked up, his eyes catching the moonlight, a spark of hope flickering in them. "But what if I forget her? What if she forgets me?" That question hit harder than the first. It wasn't just fear of death. It was fear of losing connection, of fading into oblivion. Trump didn't know how to answer, but he stayed. And that was the start of something bigger. They talked for a long time, the president and Elon Musk's son, their voices blending with the rustle of leaves swirling in the night breeze. X spoke of his grandma, how she baked chocolate cookies that smelled like home, how her hands were soft as velvet, how she hummed old songs, thinking no one heard. His words were simple but brimming with love, each memory a tiny light in the darkness. Trump listened, his heart aching with the tenderness he rarely allowed himself to feel. He shared the memory of Fred and how he taught him to play golf at Palm Beach, how his laugh was louder than the wind, how he always made time to lift his younger brother's spirits, even when things were tough. "Fred was my hero," Trump said, his voice breaking. For the first time in years, he let himself feel the pain instead of hiding it behind his usual bravado. X listened, clutching the napkin like an anchor tethering him to the world. "Do you think Grandma's still out there somewhere?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Trump looked at the stars, twinkling above like distant beacons. "I think the love you gave her is still out there," he said. "It travels, like light, and finds her, wherever she is." X relaxed a little, leaning against the bench, his small body no longer trembling. "I like that idea," he whispered, a hint of a smile in his eyes. This moment wasn't just a conversation. It was a spark that ignited change. But what comes next? You'll find out soon, because life has a test in store that will challenge everything Trump has learned. That night, Trump couldn't sleep. He returned to his quarters, but the White House's silence was deafening. He paced the room, his footsteps echoing on the parquet floor. In the corner stood an old wooden chest filled with family relics he rarely touched. On impulse, he lifted the heavy lid, and the smell of aged paper and leather hit him. There, among yellowed letters and faded photos, he found an album he hadn't opened in decades. He sat on the edge of the bed, the lamp casting soft shadows, and flipped through the pages. There they were, he and Fred on the beach at Mar-a-Lago, hair tousled by the wind, smiles wider than the horizon. There was Fred, hugging him at graduation, eyes full of pride. Each photo was a blow, but not painful, cleansing. He remembered the day Fred gave him his first business suit, saying, "Donald, you'll be great, but don't forget who you are." Trump had laughed then, but now those words burned. Who was he? A man who built skyscrapers and empires, or one too afraid to face his losses? He closed the album, his fingers trembling, and glanced at the portrait on the wall. An official photo of his presidency, where he stood with a confident smile, flanked by flags. That was the image the world knew, but not the man he was now. X's question had forced him to think about legacy. What would he leave behind? Buildings with his name, headlines, or something deeper? He recalled a childhood moment, losing his hamster Sparks, and sobbing as he asked his mother, "Where did he go?" She hugged him and said, "He's in heaven, Donald, and he's always with you." He hadn't understood then, but now, years later, he began to see the meaning. Maybe heaven wasn't a place, but the moments we create, the love we give. X's question wasn't just childish curiosity. It was a mirror, showing Trump what he'd avoided too long. The next morning, Trump woke with X's voice in his head. What if I forget? He stood at the window, watching the city stir under a gray April sky. Washington pulsed with life, but inside Trump, something was shifting. He'd spent his life building walls, speeches, deals, bravado, to keep the world at bay. But Elon Musk's son had slipped through, and now those walls were crumbling. He dressed without his usual flair, no tie, just a simple stroke and a jacket, and headed to his office. A stack of papers waited on the desk, reports, letters, requests, but he ignored them. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo of Fred, laughing in his favorite polo shirt. The light from the window fell on the image, and for a moment, it seemed Fred was looking at him. Trump traced the edges of the photo, and for the first time in decades, he let himself cry. The tears were quiet but freeing, like rain after a long drought. By noon, he called his son Barron, who lived in New York. Their relationship was strained. Rare calls, polite but hollow, like echoes in a grand hall. Barron was young, tall, with a quiet confidence that differed from his father's loud charisma. "Barron, I need to talk to you," Trump said, his voice shaking, a rarity for him. "About what?" Barron asked, wary, his tone cautious, like someone used to distance. "About Fred," Trump said. "About how I dealt with his death, or rather, how I didn't." Barron was silent, the pause heavier than words. "You never talked about him, Dad," he finally said, his voice a mix of surprise and hurt. Trump swallowed hard. "I know. And I was wrong." They talked for hours, sharing memories, pain, hopes. Barron spoke of feeling alone, waiting for his father to offer support, but finding only headlines and speeches instead. He recalled finding an old photo of Fred in the basement of Mar-a-Lago, staring at it for hours, trying to understand the uncle he barely knew. "I wanted to ask you about him," Barron admitted, "but you were always so busy." Trump closed his eyes, his son's words cutting deeper than any critic's jab. "I was wrong," he said. "I thought busyness was strength, but it was weakness. I promised to be closer." Barron paused, then said softly, "I want to believe that." The conversation was a bridge, fragile but real, and Trump knew he had to strengthen it. But this was just the start. Something else awaited him, and it'll shake you. That same day, Trump canceled a scheduled speech. no explanation, just a note to his team: I need time. He got in a car and drove to a small park in Virginia where he'd once walked with Fred. The trees stood bare, their branches reaching for the sky like hands begging forgiveness. The swings were rusted, the grass uneven, but the air held the same stillness as years ago. Trump sat on a bench, holding Fred's photo, and spoke to him as he hadn't in years. I miss you, he said, his voice hoarse. You always knew what mattered, and I was too stubborn to listen. But I'm learning, Fred, I promise. He recalled a day when they fished at a lake, their lines swaying in silence, and Fred said, life's not about how much you catch, but who you're with. Trump had rolled his eyes then, but now those words were a beacon. He stayed in the park until dusk, watching the sun paint the sky gold and pink, and for the first time in ages, felt the pain ease. On the way back, he stopped at an old church in Queens where Fred's funeral had been held. The white walls were peeling, but the red door stood firm, a sentinel of memories. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Dust hung in the air, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting colored patterns on the wooden pews. He sat in the back, fingers brushing the worn wood, and remembered standing here, young and angry, refusing to cry. Now he let the tears flow, unashamed. He recalled the priest speaking of eternal life, words that felt empty then. Now he saw meaning not in a literal heaven, but in the love that lives on in those left behind. He whispered, You're still here, Fred, and felt a warmth as if his brother answered. Back at the White House, Trump recorded a voice message on his phone. His voice was steady but soft, unlike his usual tone. If you're hearing this, I'm gone, he said, but don't be afraid. Love doesn't vanish, it travels like light, and it's always with you. He saved it. I'm sure who it was for. Barron, his grandchildren, maybe X. It was a promise, not just to them, but to himself. Days passed and the dinner faded from the news, but its echo grew. Trump began to change, and those closest to him noticed. He listened more, spoke less. At a meeting, he turned to his advisors, their faces usually masks of professionalism, and asked, What's the toughest question your kid ever asked you? The room went still, as if he'd broken. An older general with weary eyes spoke. My son asks why I work so much if I can't stop wars, he said, his voice cracking. Others joined in, sharing stories of children asking about death, justice, the meaning of life. Trump listened, nodding, and for the first time saw his advisors not as colleagues, but as people with hearts full of questions. He started carrying a notebook, jotting down questions he overheard. What happens after we die? Does love ever stop? What if I'm forgotten? Each was a thread, tying him to X, to Fred, to everyone who'd ever wondered and stayed silent. But then came a twist no one saw coming. A week later, an aide burst into Trump's office, face pale. So it's X, Elon Musk's son. There's been trouble. Elon Musk had been in a private plane crash. The injuries weren't life-threatening, but the news roared like thunder. X was brought to the White House, waiting in the East Wing, clutching that same crumpled napkin, his small fingers trembling. Trump dropped everything and rushed to him. He found the boy in a quiet room, pale, eyes brimming with fear. Is my dad going to disappear too? X whispered, his voice barely audible. Trump knelt, his large frame awkward next to the fragile boy. Your dad's tough, X, he said, his voice firm but warm. He'll be back. And you're not alone. I'm here. X nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks, and leaned into Trump, his small hands gripping the president's jacket. In that moment, Trump wasn't a president, not a figure on screens, but a man holding a child who needed him. And how would this change them both? Don't miss this, because the story gets deeper. The media exploded with headlines. Trump comforts Elon Musk's son. Cameras buzzed, pundits debated. Some called it a PR stunt, others a rare glimpse of humanity. But Trump didn't care about the noise. He cared about X. He visited Elon in the hospital, sat by his bed, and talked not about business or tech, but about fatherhood. about the questions that keep you up at night. Your son's braver than I ever was, Trump said, his voice raw. Musk nodded, his eyes glistening. I know, he replied. He asks questions I'm not ready to answer. Trump gave a small smile. Maybe that's his gift, making us think. They sat in silence, two men whose lives were filled with noise, but in that moment found common ground. When Elon recovered, he called Trump. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice steady but grateful. Trump replied, I did. X showed me what matters. And here's what will stick with you. X's question didn't just change Trump. It sent ripples that touched lives he'd never know. The news of Trump's actions spread, sparking debates across platforms. Some praise his compassion. Others question his motives. But the story of a president kneeling beside a frightened boy captured hearts. Social media buzzed with posts, if a kid's question can change a president, what can it do for us? Trump read these, not with his usual bravado, but with a quiet sense of purpose. He wasn't chasing headlines anymore. He was chasing something real. That night, Trump sat with Melania in their private quarters, the fire crackling softly. She'd watched him change over the weeks, his usual intensity softened by something new. You're different, she said, her voice gentle. What happened out there with that boy? Trump looked at her, his eyes softer than she'd seen in years. He asked a question nobody else dared to, he said, and it made me remember who I want to be. Not just for the world, but for you, for Barron, for everyone I've let down. Melania reached for his hand, her touch warm. I've always wanted you to let us in, she said. This is the Donald I fell in love with. They sat in silence, the weight of years lifting, and Trump felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. But the journey wasn't over. There was more to come, and it'll pull you in. Inspired by X, Trump took a bold step. He launched an initiative called Ask the Question, encouraging kids to share their toughest questions with leaders, teachers, and parents. He announced it at a school in D.C., standing before a crowd of wide-eyed children. A boy named X taught me something, he said, his voice steady. He asked, what happens when we die? And it showed me that questions aren't weakness, they're strength. So ask away, kids. I'm listening. The room erupted in cheers, and hands shot up. A girl asked, why do people fight? A boy asked, can we save the planet? Trump answered each with patience, surprising even his staff. The initiative spread, schools across the country adopted it, and letters from kids poured into the White House. Questions about love, fear, the future. Trump read them late at night, his notebook filling with their words, each one a reminder of X's courage. Months later, Trump traveled to New York, to the cemetery where Fred was buried. The headstone was simple, weathered by time, but the air felt sacred. He knelt, placing a single white rose, and spoke softly. I'm trying, Fred, he said. I'm trying to live the way you would have wanted. He thought of their childhood, racing bikes through Queens, Fred always letting him win. He thought of Fred's laugh, his advice, his light. The pain was still there, but it was softer now, woven into love that hadn't faded. As he stood, a breeze stirred, carrying the scent of spring, and he felt Fred's presence, steady and warm. The changes in Trump didn't go unnoticed. At a press conference, a reporter asked, what's behind this new side of you? Trump paused, then said, a kid asked me a question, and it made me look at myself. I didn't like what I saw, so I'm fixing it. The room was silent, then buzzed with murmurs. Critics called it a ploy, but supporters shared stories of his school visits, his letters to kids, his quieter demeanor. One pundit wrote, if Trump can change, maybe we all can. Trump didn't read the op-eds. He was too busy answering a letter from a girl in Ohio who asked, what if I'm not good enough? He wrote back, you're enough just by asking. Keep going. One evening, Trump returned to the White House garden, to that same bench under the oak. He hadn't seen X in months, but he'd heard the boy was thriving, asking new questions, driving Elon crazy in the best way. Trump smiled at the thought. The stars were bright, the air cool. He pulled Fred's photo from his pocket and spoke to it, soft as a prayer. "You're still here," he said. "I feel you." A breeze rustled the leaves and he heard footsteps. It was Barron, who'd come unannounced. "I heard you were out here," he said, sitting beside him. "You okay, Dad?" Trump looked at his son and saw the boy who once asked why the moon followed their car. "I'm better than I've been in years," he said. "A kid named X asked me something, and it reminded me what matters." Barron tilted his head. "What'd he ask?" Trump smiled. "What happens when people die? And I realize it's not about where we go. It's about what we leave behind, like love, memories, you." Barron's eyes glistened. "You've never talked like that before." Trump nodded. "I know. I'm learning." They sat in silence, warm and full, and Trump felt a peace he hadn't known in years.